Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be doing my quarter 3 check-in for my reading so far this year. We're going to go over some of my overall reading statistics, some of my quarter 3 specific reading statistics, and also go ahead and look at some of the goals that I set at the beginning of the year, see where I am with some of those, and see if I need to push a little bit harder anywhere, or if I can kind of coast with some of those goals, or if some of them are just, already completely checked off the list. So let's go ahead and start off with my overall reading statistics. So my goal for this year was to read 45 books, or around 20,000 pages. And so far I have read 41 books, which is 91%. So we are going to kill that goal. I figured we would. I thought the pages would be a little bit more of a challenge. And so I'm currently at 14,110 pages, which is about 70% of that 20K goal. And obviously these, for the page numbers, this is a rough estimate. Some of this would depend on which edition of a book you're reading and all those kinds of things. But overall, I am kind of in the ballpark there. 30% for one quarter. I guess technically I'm a little bit behind there, but I'm not too worried about it. I think I'll have a pretty good shot if I have a couple good reading months here. And I do have a couple really long books that I know that I want to read coming up, and so those are probably going to be close to 1,000 pages alone on themselves. So if I can read just a couple of those, we'll hit that 20K goal pretty easily. My average rating for all of those books so far this year is a 3.47. I have had 5 2-star reads, 12 3-star, 19 4-star, and only 2 5-star reads so far for this year, which I think is pretty good. I think that's about what I would want to see. I always talk about my reading and my expectations for myself of being a slightly adjusted bell curve, where because I'm purposely going and reading things that I specifically think I will like, that the bulk of my reading should be like 3, 4, and 5 stars, and not so much on the 2 and 1-star side. And that is definitely true so far. And once again, I'm one of those people who thinks a 3-star is still a good book. I know a lot of arguments can be had about what ratings mean what and everything, but for me specifically, and I always want to say this, is a 3-star is still a good book for me. It's one that I liked, and I think I know for a lot of people, a 3-star book is a horrible book, but for me, that is still a good book. And so I expect a lot of stuff to be 3, 4, and then only a very small amount of stuff to be a 5-star or a 1-star, and actually a 2-star, because I don't specifically go and try to read things that I don't think I'll like. So for a couple of quarter 3 specific statistics, in quarter 3, this was probably my worst reading month of the year so far. I had a couple big trips. I went to Sturgis, North Dakota on my motorcycle for, I think that was a 2-week trip, and I didn't read at all for that. So that definitely took a lot of my reading time. I read some long books that took me a long time to get through, just a whole lot of stuff. And so I don't necessarily mean that it was bad reading quality wise, even though I think technically this would probably be my lowest rated chunk of the quarter. I didn't do the math on it, but just looking at my top 10 and stuff overall, there's only one book from this quarter in there. So that kind of, paints you the picture of what's going on there. But I read those 12 books, and I am actually halfway through another one that I'm kind of giving a little bit of credit here to quarter number 3, which is about 3,681 pages. Once again, probably the lowest numbers I have from the first 2 quarters of this year, but that's fine. Quarter 3, like I said, a lot of stuff going on, and that's okay. You don't always have to be on top of your reading. It's a hobby, and so ebbs and flows are totally okay for me. Talking about quarter 3 specifically, I do want to talk about my 3 favorite reads from this quarter so far, and those would be Not Till We Are Lost by Dennis E. Taylor. This is the newest book in the Bobbyverse series. I did a full dedicated review for that, and I once again think that maybe I came off a little bit negative in that review, but this is my favorite book from this quarter. It's one of my favorite books I've read this year. We'll get to that when I go over my updated top 10 for this point in the year so far. But after that, it is The Night by Will White. This was a huge surprise for me. I had liked the first 2 books in this series, the Last Horizon series by Will White, who is most famous for Cradle. But The Night for me was just the best of the bunch so far. It was very action heavy, but it really revolved around a character who I've really grown to like. So it could probably be hit and miss for a lot of people, but for me, that was the second best book I read for the quarter. And then the third best book for this quarter for me was The Master of Whitestorm by Janny Wirtz. This is kind of a sword and sorcery story that ends up being a lot more. I think a lot of people look at sword and sorcery and like Monster of the Day kind of stuff as like low quality and that kind of stuff, but that is not the case here. This story ends up being a whole lot of things, and I obviously really enjoyed it, as it was the third favorite from quarter number 3. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the goals that I set and see where I am at this point in the year, and see if there's anything I need to change and adjust to meet some of those goals. So my first goal for this year was to read at least 1 nonfiction book, and I have done that. I've actually read 2 nonfiction books. None of those happened in quarter 3, but this is one of those goals where I set the bar really low at 1, because nonfiction isn't something I normally gravitate towards. It's not something it's not that I don't want to read it, it's just not what I want to go to. There's so many fantasy and sci-fi books that I want to read, and honestly even just literary fiction that I want to read, that reading real stuff just doesn't always pull me to it. I do enjoy like a good documentary and everything, and so maybe it's just I like to consume that kind of content through that medium instead of necessarily reading it. There are definitely nonfiction books that I think have a lot of merit, and I probably would want to read them at some point, but right now it's not like a huge priority for me, but I did definitely want to get at least one in this year. So the fact that I'm at 2, and maybe I'll add in a third one here in the last quarter of the year just to kind of bump that and triple my goal, we'll see. But so far, I guess I can just count this one as successful and move on from it if I decide to go that route. Another goal I had for myself was to read a little bit more out of the US-UK bubble, and I have done an okay job of that overall this year. I definitely think it's important to try to get stories and perspectives from cultures that are significantly different than what I'm used to, and I think just so many fantasy stories in particular come from those regions with those kinds of histories placed behind them, that seeing things outside of that is really nice. And so in quarter 3, I actually read 2 books that would fit this criteria. The first would be The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw, and that is from a Malaysian author. And then the other one is The Deal of a Lifetime by Frederick Bachman, who is technically a Swedish author. So those are 2 that I got outside of that like UK, US bubble a little bit. Definitely something I could still work on a little bit more. If you have good recommendations, I have a couple that I hopefully will be reading soon that are definitely much more Asian inspired or from Asian authors and stuff. So we'll see if I can get any of that actually done in quarter 4. But if you have any suggestions for ones that are outside of that like US, UK bubble, definitely let me know, because I would be interested in definitely reading some of those. Another goal was to read some more classics, and I can say that in quarter 3, I did not read anything that I think I would consider a classic. Obviously, the classic title means different things to different people. I think when I originally made this goal, it was anything from like 1975 and later I was counting kind of as a classic. Maybe that's something that could be adjusted depending on who you talk to, what the book itself is. Maybe one is just so important to a specific genre but came out a little bit after that I would, put it into this classic genre. But I didn't read any classics or anything that I would consider a classic in that sense here in quarter 3. So that is definitely something I think just overall this year I haven't really done a good job of. There's been some older sci-fi that I've read. Most of the things that have been older that I would consider classic have been sci-fi, and some of it's been really good, some of it not so much. But I just think in general, maybe it's something that one book a month I should probably be reading, something that's a little bit older, maybe a little bit foundational to whatever genre I'm reading. I think it's nice to go back and see, you can see inspirations from a lot of things when you read some of those older classic works, and I think that's maybe something I need to put a little bit more focus on, just to kind of increase my knowledge on the sci-fi and fantasy genre in general. A goal that I was a little bit more successful with is read authors that are new to me. Last year I did the Year of Sanderson, right? And so I read every Cosmere book, which was like 30 something books, but they were all from one author. And so this year I definitely wanted to prioritize reading new authors to me, and I have definitely done a much better job of that this year. And I did 4 of those alone here in quarter 3. So that would be R.M. Melch, Cassandra Khaw, who I already talked about, Keanu Reeves, Tiny Mayeville. I'm not 100% sure how to count that one, if that's 2 or 1 author. And then the other one is Brian Lee Durfee. And back to a goal that I also haven't done very well here in quarter 3. I did really well with this goal early on in the year, and I don't know if it's because a lot of the books I have read I already own, but I had the goal of using the library a lot more. And early in this year, I used the library a lot, and I was really happy with it. It was great, definitely a great way to save some money and still read exactly what you want to read. But this quarter, I think just a lot of stuff was either on sale or stuff I had already owned for a while, and so I really haven't had to utilize the library. So I'm going to kind of count this as a push, not necessarily a failure, because I don't think I've really bought a whole lot of books. I don't like do book hauls here, so I don't really keep like a strict track of what I have been buying, but it doesn't feel like outside of my Audible credit, I've been buying a lot of books, which is kind of was the goal with using the library. And then I had one other goal, which was related to my manga reading, and it was to read more / be more consistent about reading manga. And that is definitely a huge failure here for quarter 3. And I think I've just kind of come to the realization that that's just how I'm going to be with manga. There are times where I get super into it and I'll read like a bunch of stuff all at once, so many chapters of different things, and then I just don't feel like going back to it. I did just finish a series of one that I've been reading for a really long time in My Hero Academia, and since I finished that, I don't know if I maybe read like 10 chapters of Dragon Ball that I've been going through and rereading, or reading for the first time. I guess the first time I consumed that was I watched the anime, but outside of those, I really just haven't had that like push or urge to really get into it, which is fine. It's not really my main focus, and I enjoy manga when I do read it. It's just not a huge goal. Like I said, I think I would be better if I was a little bit more consistent with it, but this is one of those goals that at the time it felt like a good idea, and where I am now in life, it's not as important to me as some of the other goals that I had. And so those were all reading goals. I did have 2 life goals that I put up in the first edition of this I did when I did the quarter 1 check-in or goals or whatever it was. And the first one was to spend less time on my phone, just like wasting time. And I will say in quarter 3, I was probably worse about it than earlier in the year. So, this is a good video, and this is part of why I like to do these, to like refocus and reset and see what goals you want to continue pursuing. And this is definitely one that I want to keep pursuing and get better at, because I have just wasted a lot of time like scrolling on nothing for no reason. So to get back to not doing that would be really nice, and then that would probably just give me more time to read. So that it's kind of a win-win situation. I think a lot of people know that being on your phone a whole lot is not necessarily a really great thing for you, and just all the kinds of things that go along with that. So if I could spend a little bit less time on that and be a little bit more productive, that would be great. And then my other goal at the time was to compete in a strongman competition and do another powerlifting meet. And at this time, I have actually done 2 strongman competitions this year, none in quarter 3 technically, but they both happened this year. And the second one kind of took place of the powerlifting meet. I still might end up doing one. I've been invited to, it's just one, maybe 2. I've maybe been invited to 2 powerlifting meets, but that's not really my focus in training anymore. So it's really all gone to strongman. I really enjoy strongman training a whole lot more. And so I'm kind of starting to already eye competitions for strongman that will happen next year. I doubt I'll be able to compete again in this last quarter 4 of this year, just with life and everything that's coming up with it. I just don't think I'll be able to. But I think sometime in 2025, I'll compete in strongman again. And I do train. I never stop doing that. Lifting weights is actually probably my biggest passion, more than anything else, more than reading, more than anything. That is my number one, is working out and lifting weights. So that is definitely something that I will continue to be involved in. And so that is one of those goals that I guess I'm going to count that as a check, because if I do a powerlifting meet, it's kind of just like a cherry at this point. Powerlifting kind of is what got me into real strength sports, but it's not something I have like a burning passion for anymore, even though I have immense respect for powerlifters and all of that stuff. But for me, strongman has definitely kind of taken that flag and has run with it. But I can't be too upset with that life goal so far. And then the last thing I wanted to do is just do a check-in for my top 10 books of the year so far. Maybe this is spoiling what my top 10 books for the year overall will be, but that's okay. People will still watch that video because everyone loves those, including myself. So in the number 10 spot, we have Return to Aden by Philip Chase. In the 9 spot is A Time of Changes by Robert Silverberg. In the 8th spot, we have Not Till We Are Lost by Dennis E. Taylor, which is that Bobbyverse book that I read this quarter, and that is the only one from this quarter that is on this list. In the 7th spot, I have Cujo by Stephen King. In the 6th spot, we have The War Host of Vastmark by Janny Wirtz. In the 5th spot, we have Empire of the Vampire, and in the 4th spot, we have Empire of the Damned. So those are both Jay Kristoff books, part of the same series. In the 3rd spot is Misery by Stephen King, so another Stephen King book. All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy is my second favorite so far of this year. And then in the top spot so far is Pet Sematary, once again by Stephen King. So that is my top 10 books so far going into this year. There are some really big contenders coming up here. So I'm currently in the middle of The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee, and I did want to mention that this book, if I had finished it in quarter 3, and I'm not done with it yet, so I can't actually rank it completely, it has definitely a shot of being a top 3 book for this quarter if I had finished it here. And honestly, it probably has a shot of being in that top 10. We'll see. I'm really digging it so far. I'm not even 50% of the way into it yet, but I have very much been enjoying that one. And then, like I said, there are some other heavy hitters. We have Fury of the Gods by John Gwynne that's coming. I expect that to be really good. Obviously, the big one in Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. I really want that to end up being in the top 10, because after Rhythm of War, I mean, it's not that I didn't like Rhythm of War, but it definitely was my least favorite of it. So to end this arc of Stormlight, and what we're not supposed to get a real Stormlight book for like 10 years after this one, for this one to be in the top 10, I would love for it to be my number 1 book of the year, just because I really liked that series. And for it to go on such a hiatus, I know we're going to get other Cosmere stuff and everything, but I would really love for that to just blow me away and just be one of my favorite books ever. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. That's a high pedestal to put a book on, which, is maybe fair, maybe it's not, but that, that's the world we live in. So we'll see if this top 10 shakes up. That is my quarter 3 check-in. Let me know how your reading has been going so far this year. Any highlights, any lowlights, let's talk about some of the negative stuff as well. But that's all for me. And as always, have a good one.